November 14th, 1942. North Atlantic, 49 degrees north, 12 degrees west. The British destroyer HMS Farndale rolled through heavy seas as sonar operator William Harris pressed his headphones tight against his ears. Through the cacophony of wave noise and propeller wash, he heard it, a faint metallic echo, bearing 085, range 1,800 yards. His hand moved to the telephone. Contact. Submarine contact. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. On the bridge, Commander Thomas watched the new weapon mounted forward of the bridge. 24 steel spigots arranged in 6 rows, each one angled slightly different from its neighbour. The sailors had nicknamed it the Hedgehog because the empty launcher spigots looked like quills on a hedgehog's back. This would be the weapon's first operational test against a real U-boat. What Commander Thomas didn't know was that this single attack would mark the beginning of a revolution in anti-submarine warfare, one that would give German U-boat crews less than 20 seconds to live once detection occurred. The mathematics of submarine warfare had always favoured the hunted. Traditional depth charges required the attacking ship to pass directly over the submarine's estimated position, then drop the charges off the stern. By the time the explosives sank to depth and detonated, the submarine had already moved. The attacking ship's sonar went blind the moment it passed overhead, creating what submariners called the dead zone. In this gap, measured in seconds but feeling like eternity, a skilled U-boat commander could execute emergency turns, blow ballast tanks for depth changes, or deploy decoys. Survival rates reflected this advantage. In 1942, depth charge attacks succeeded in sinking a U-boat only once in every 80 attempts. The Hedgehog changed everything. Developed by Britain's Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, a group of engineers nicknamed the Wheezers and Dodgers, the weapon fired its payload ahead of the attacking ship, 200 yards ahead, to be precise. This meant the destroyer could maintain sonar contact throughout the entire attack. No dead zone, no blind time, no opportunity for evasive maneuvers. From the moment a U-boat was detected until the Hedgehog projectiles entered the water, German submarine commanders had approximately 20 seconds to save their boats and crews. Those 20 seconds represented a calculation as brutal as any equation in warfare. The Hedgehog launcher fired 24 projectiles in pairs, with 1/10 to 2/10 of a second between each pair. The entire salvo launched in under 2 seconds. The spigots were angled so the highest trajectories fired first and the flattest trajectories last, ensuring all 24 bombs entered the water simultaneously, landing in an elliptical pattern, 140 feet wide by 120 feet long. Then physics took over. Each projectile weighed 65 pounds and carried 35 pounds of Torpex explosive. Torpex, a British innovation combining 42% RDX, 40% TNT, and 18% powdered aluminum, was 50% more powerful than TNT alone. The projectiles sank at 23 feet per second. At this rate, they would reach a U-boat at 200 feet depth in under 9 seconds, at 300 feet, roughly 13 seconds. At 400 feet, the maximum effective depth for Hedgehog attacks, approximately 17 seconds. These numbers defined the narrow window of survival for German submariners. The moment sonar detected them, they were already running out of time. Traditional evasive maneuvers, crash dives, emergency turns, thermal layer exploitation, all became meaningless. The Hedgehog bombs were already in the water, sinking 3 times faster than conventional depth charges, and they would detonate only on contact with a solid object. No preset depth, no hydrostatic fuse, just direct impact with the pressure hull. Aboard U-624 in the North Atlantic during the autumn of 1943, Kapitänleutnant Ulrich Graf had survived 11 war patrols. His hydrophone operator, Mechanikermat Hans Weber, had learned to distinguish between different Allied warship types by the sound of their propellers. British destroyers made a distinctive high-pitched whine. American destroyer escorts had a heavier, more resonant beat. Corvettes sounded different still, their engines creating a rhythmic thrumming that could be heard from miles away. What Weber couldn't hear in advance was the Hedgehog firing sequence. Traditional depth charge attacks announced themselves. The attacking ship would increase speed, its propellers churning louder as it accelerated to pass over the submarine's position. Then came the unmistakable splash of charges hitting the water, followed by the terrifying weight as they sank toward detonation depth. This warning gave U-boat commanders precious seconds to maneuver. The Hedgehog provided no such courtesy. The weapon fired while the attacking ship maintained steady sonar contact. The propeller noise didn't change. There was no acceleration, no obvious preparation. Just a faint series of splashes, 24 in total, barely distinguishable from wave action in heavy seas. By the time Weber could identify the sound pattern and alert his commander, the projectiles were already halfway to their depth. Graf had perhaps 10 seconds to react. His options were limited, and all of them bad. He could order an emergency dive to maximum depth, but U-624 was already at 250 feet. Going deeper meant descending toward the crush depth where the pressure hull might fail. He could order hard rudder, attempting a turn that might move the boat outside the impact pattern. But the Hedgehog pattern was 140 feet wide. The boat itself was 220 feet long. Simple geometry suggested any turn would keep at least part of the hull within the lethal zone. He could blow ballast tanks and attempt an emergency ascent, but that would take the boat upward through the exact depth range where the Hedgehog projectiles were descending. The chance of collision would actually increase. He could stop all engines and drift silently, but the projectiles were already targeted on his current position. Stopping wouldn't move the boat outside the pattern in time. The mathematics were inexorable. Once detected, once the Hedgehog fired, survival became a matter of probability rather than skill. The contact fuses on each projectile armed after they entered the water and sank for a few seconds. The mechanism was simple but deadly. A steel rod extended from the nose of each bomb. On contact with anything solid, submarine hull, ocean floor, the rod drove backward, triggering the detonator. 35 pounds of Torpex exploded with the equivalent force of 52 pounds of TNT. The explosion occurred directly against the pressure hull with no cushion of water to absorb the shock. Traditional depth charges exploded at a distance from their target, and the water between the charge and the submarine dissipated much of the blast energy. Naval engineers calculated that a depth charge needed to explode within 14 feet of a submarine to guarantee a kill. The Hedgehog bomb, detonating on contact, punched a 3 to 4 inch diameter hole directly through the pressure hull. At depth, water entered through this hole at approximately 400 gallons per minute. The flooding was catastrophic and effectively unstoppable. Within seconds, atmospheric pressure inside the submarine began to rise as the incoming water compressed the air. Temperature climbed rapidly. At 400 gallons per minute, a single compartment could flood completely, in less than 2 minutes. The added weight destroyed the boat's trim and depth control. The submarine began sinking deeper, increasing water pressure and accelerating the flood rate. Within minutes, the temperature inside the hull could exceed 200 degrees Fahrenheit, searing the lungs of the crew. Most U-boats that took a Hedgehog hit never resurfaced. The statistics were sobering. During the war, British forces made 5,174 depth charge attacks, achieving 85.5 kills, a ratio of 60 to 1. The Hedgehog, by contrast, achieved 47 kills in 268 attacks, a ratio of 5.7 to 1. The weapon was more than 10 times as effective as conventional depth charges. This effectiveness had nothing to do with the size of the warhead. Hedgehog bombs carried 35 pounds of explosive compared to 300 pounds in a standard depth charge. The difference was precision. Depth charges relied on explosive shock transmitted through water. Hedgehogs relied on direct contact. One required overwhelming force, the other required accuracy. The Hedgehog provided both accuracy and sufficient explosive power to guarantee a kill. The weapon's development had been driven by a fundamental problem with ASDIC, the British term for active sonar. ASDIC worked by transmitting sound pulses underwater and measuring the time it took for echoes to return from solid objects. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. The speed of sound in water is approximately 4,800 feet per second. At close range, the time between transmission and echo return became so short that the human operator couldn't distinguish the returning echo from the original pulse. This created what engineers called instantaneous echo. When a submarine entered this blind spot, typically at ranges under 200 yards, it became effectively invisible to ASDIC. The attacking ship had to sprint forward, hoping the submarine hadn't changed course or depth. Then it would drop depth charges blindly and hope the submarine was still in the target area when the charges reached detonation depth. This entire process took time, and time favored the submarine. The solution was a weapon that fired forward, striking targets while they were still detectable by ASDIC. Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Blacker of the Royal Artillery had developed the spigot mortar principle during the interwar period. Instead of a conventional mortar tube, the spigot design used a steel rod mounted on a baseplate. The projectile had a hollow tail that fit over this spigot. The propelling charge, contained in the main weapon rather than the projectile, detonated against the spigot, driving the projectile upward and forward. This design allowed a single launcher to fire projectiles of different sizes and weights. The Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development adapted this principle to create the Hedgehog, 24 spigots mounted in a steel cradle, each angled to ensure the proper spread pattern. Electric firing circuits allowed the crew to launch all 24 projectiles in under 2 seconds. The entire assembly weighed approximately 11 tons fully loaded, light enough to mount on destroyer escorts and corvettes. Initial tests were conducted aboard HMS Westcott in May 1941 against a known wreck in Liverpool Bay. The results were spectacular. Multiple projectiles struck the wreck, demonstrating the weapon's accuracy. Production began 9 months later. By late 1942, 100 British ships carried the Hedgehog. The first U-boat kill came in November 1942. But operational success required more than just installing the weapon. Crews had to learn how to use it effectively. Early kill rates were barely better than depth charges, approximately 5%. Many captains preferred traditional depth charges because they at least created psychological effect even when they missed. The massive underwater, explosions, the towering columns of water, the shock waves transmitted through both hulls, all contributed to the terror of depth charge attacks. Hedgehog attacks, by contrast, were silent unless they scored a hit. If the projectiles missed, they sank to the ocean floor and never detonated. No explosions, no visible effect, no way to know if the attack had damaged the target. Crews found this unsettling. They wanted confirmation, even if it was just the false reassurance of massive detonations that probably missed. The Royal Navy addressed this problem through intensive training and advocacy. Officers from the Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development travelled to bases like Londonderry, where escort vessels were stationed. They conducted ship-wide talks, demonstrating successful Hedgehog attacks and explaining the mathematics of contact fusing versus proximity fusing. They emphasized that silence meant the target was still alive and detectable, allowing immediate follow-up attacks. Explosions meant direct hits and almost certain kills. The training worked. By mid-1944, 1 in every 5 Hedgehog attacks resulted in a kill. Experienced crews achieved even higher success rates. The weapon's advantages compounded over multiple attacks. Because failed attacks didn't disturb the water with massive explosions, sonar remained effective. The attacking ship could immediately prepare another salvo, maintaining pressure on the submarine. Traditional depth charge attacks required minutes for the water to settle before sonar could reacquire the target, giving submarines time to escape. The tactical implications transformed anti-submarine warfare. Before Hedgehog, a submarine that survived the initial attack had good odds of escape. After Hedgehog, each attack maintained the same probability of success because sonar contact never broke. A submarine that evaded the first salvo still faced a second and a third, and however many salvos the attacking ship could deliver before the submarine either died or exhausted its battery power and was forced to surface. German submarine commanders recognized the change in May 1943, a month submariners came to call Black May. During that single month, Allied forces sank 41 U-boats. The introduction of escort carriers, improved radar, better ASDIC techniques, and weapons like the Hedgehog created a perfect storm of technological advantage. U-boat losses began exceeding replacement rates. The underwater war shifted from a contest of tactical skill to a brutal calculus of industrial capacity and technological superiority. Aboard U-94 during a convoy battle in May 1943, Korvettenkapitän Otto Weiss heard his hydrophone operator report multiple escort destroyers closing from different bearings. This was a new tactic, the creeping attack, where one destroyer maintained sonar contact while directing a second destroyer forward in complete silence. The first destroyer could track the U-boat's evasive maneuvers and continuously update the silent attacker's course. When the silent destroyer was directly over the target, it would attack with hedgehogs. Weiss ordered all engines stopped, hoping to mask his acoustic signature. But the active sonar pinging from the tracking destroyer found him anyway. The pings came faster, closer, more insistent. Then they stopped. Weiss knew what that meant. The attack was imminent. He grabbed the periscope housing for support and waited. The splashes came 15 seconds later. Soft thumps, almost gentle, like stones thrown into a pond. 24 of them in quick succession. Then silence. Weiss counted seconds in his head. 5, 6, 7. The projectiles were sinking at 23 feet per second. U-94 was at 280 feet. They would reach his depth in roughly 12 seconds from water entry. 8, 9, 10. He considered ordering an emergency blow, but that would make noise and confirm his exact position. 11, 12. The first impact came without warning. A tremendous crash against the forward torpedo room. The lights went out. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in red. 2 more impacts aft. The pressure hull held, but barely. Water began spraying through stressed seams. Damage reports came in over voice tubes. Forward torpedo room taking water. Port motor room, minor flooding. Aft trim tanks damaged. The boat was still diving, now passing 300 feet. Weiss ordered maximum air to ballast tanks, but the compressed air system had been damaged. The boat continued descending. 320 feet. 350, well beyond the rated depth of the Type 7's pressure hull. The hull began creaking, a sound every submariner dreaded, metal groaning under impossible pressure. Small leaks became larger, the flooding accelerated. Weiss made the only decision left: emergency surface, blow everything. The compressed air that remained roared into the ballast tanks. The boat began rising, but slowly, too slowly. The escorts above would hear the ballast blow. They would be waiting with deck guns and more depth charges. U-94 broke surface 6 minutes after the Hedgehog attack. The crew began evacuating through the conning tower hatch. British destroyers were already closing, their deck guns firing. Weiss was the last man off. He stood on the conning tower as the boat slipped beneath the waves for the final time, then dove into the oil-slicked water. Of U-94's crew of 48 men, 31 survived to become prisoners of war. This became the pattern. Hedgehog attacks that scored even a single hit typically forced submarines to surface or sink. The contact detonation was simply too devastating to survive at depth. Even near misses could cause severe damage if multiple projectiles struck close together. The shock waves, though less powerful than depth charge explosions, were still sufficient to damage equipment, crack welds, and stress the pressure hull. The weapon's success in the Atlantic theater soon spread to the Pacific. The United States Navy adopted the Hedgehog in late 1942 through a reverse lend-lease arrangement with Britain. American production began almost immediately, with modifications to make the weapon more rugged and flexible in operation. The Mark G Hedgehog fired an elliptical pattern to a range of 200 yards. The Mark XI fired a circular pattern to a range of 267 yards. American destroyer escorts proved particularly effective with the weapon. These ships, smaller and less powerful than fleet destroyers, were specifically designed for anti-submarine warfare. They carried advanced sonar equipment, multiple Hedgehog launchers, and crews trained exclusively in submarine hunting. In the Pacific, they faced Japanese submarines operating along supply routes and patrol lines. The most spectacular success came in May 1944 when USS England, a Buckley-class destroyer escort, used the Hedgehog to sink 6 Japanese submarines in 12 days. This achievement remains unmatched in naval history. England's executive officer, Lieutenant John Williamson, had developed mathematical attack procedures that maximized the Hedgehog's effectiveness. His methods were studied and adopted throughout the Pacific Fleet, significantly improving overall anti-submarine success rates. The first kill came on May 19th against submarine HMS. England detected the submarine at 2,000 yards range and immediately began the attack approach. The Hedgehog fired its first salvo at 13:41 hours. Clean miss. Williamson adjusted calculations based on the submarine's observed evasion pattern. Second salvo at 13:58 scored 1 hit. The submarine was damaged but still maneuverable. Third salvo missed when the submarine executed a radical course change. Fourth salvo also missed. The submarine commander was as skilled, using every tactical advantage available. But Williamson kept attacking, maintained sonar contact, calculated new attack parameters after each attempt. Fifth salvo at 15:35 was the killing blow. Multiple projectiles struck the submarine's pressure hull. The boat sank with all hands. From initial detection to final kill, the attack lasted nearly 4 hours. Traditional depth charge attacks might have allowed the submarine to escape during the long pursuit. The Hedgehog's ability to attack while maintaining sonar contact made escape impossible. England's 6th kill, achieved 12 days after the first, demonstrated the weapon's consistency. The target, submarine WWII, survived attacks from multiple ships, including conventional depth charge barrages. The submarine commander used every evasive technique known, discharged debris to create false targets, released oil to simulate damage, executed violent maneuvers that pushed his boat to structural limits. The hunt continued through an entire night with multiple ships taking turns attacking. At 7:36 on the morning of May 31st, England fired her Hedgehog salvo. Between 6 and 10 projectiles found their mark. The resulting detonation was massive, followed by secondary explosions as WWII's own torpedoes detonated. A column of water shot hundreds of feet into the air. The submarine was literally blown apart. All 56 crew members were killed instantly. The oil slick that rose to the surface spread for miles, mixed with debris that included recognizable pieces of the submarine's hull, wooden decking, and personal effects of the crew. Admiral Ernest J. King, Chief of Naval Operations, sent a message to England that would become famous. There'll always be an England in the United States Navy. The crew received the Presidential Unit Citation, one of only 3 destroyer escort crews in World War II to receive this honor. Lieutenant Commander Walton Pendleton received the Navy Cross for his leadership during the submarine killing spree. But the weapon's impact extended beyond individual success stories. The Hedgehog fundamentally changed the tactical calculus of submarine warfare. German and Japanese submarine commanders, who had previously operated with confidence in their ability to evade attacks, now faced weapon systems that achieved seemingly impossible accuracy. Morale reports from intercepted documents revealed growing reluctance among submarine commanders to engage Allied surface forces. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical destruction. Submarine warfare had always relied on stealth and the advantage of surprise. A submerged submarine was supposed to be nearly impossible to hit. The Hedgehog shattered this assumption. U-boat crews knew that once detected, they had less than 20 seconds before projectiles entered the water. Less than 20 seconds to execute maneuvers that would probably fail, less than 20 seconds before the bombs sank to their depth and either missed completely or struck with lethal precision. This knowledge wore on crews during long patrols. Every ping from Allied sonar represented a potential death sentence. Every distant propeller noise might be an escort, armed with hedgehogs closing for an attack. The stress compounded over time, degraded combat effectiveness, and contributed to the catastrophic decline in U-boat performance during the war's final 2 years. The German Navy attempted countermeasures. They developed acoustic torpedoes, beginning with the Falke in 1943. These homing torpedoes could be fired without periscope observation, allowing submarines to remain deeper and avoid detection longer. But these weapons were expensive, available in limited quantities, and only partially effective against escorts using towed noisemakers as decoys. German engineers also researched absorbent coatings and rubber hull paints to reduce ASDIC signatures. These efforts achieved minimal success. The physics of active sonar made complete stealth impossible. Sound waves reflected from any solid object, and a submarine's pressure hull was substantial and metallic. Minor reductions in acoustic signature did nothing to defeat the combination of improved Allied sonar techniques and forward-firing weapons. The Kriegsmarine introduced the Pillenwerfer, a device that released chemical tablets creating bubble screens to confuse sonar. Inexperienced operators sometimes fell for this deception, but trained sonar operators learned to distinguish between fixed bubble clouds and moving targets by analyzing Doppler shift in the returning echoes. The Pillenwerfer bought U-boats perhaps a few extra seconds at best. Against the Hedgehog's 20-second window, this was meaningless. By late 1944, German submarine operations had been reduced to desperate gambles. The introduction of schnorkel equipment allowed submarines to run their diesel engines while submerged at periscope depth, reducing surface time and radar exposure. But schnorkels created their own problems. The breathing tubes could be detected by radar. The need to remain at shallow depth made submarines vulnerable to air attacks, and if detected by surface escorts, the boats still faced the same impossible mathematics of the Hedgehog attack. U-boat losses told the story in numbers. In 1942, Germany lost 87 U-boats. In 1943, losses climbed to 244 boats. In 1944, losses reached 241 boats despite having fewer submarines on patrol. By 1945, most U-boats that deployed never returned. The overall loss rate reached 75%, higher than any other branch of any armed forces in the entire war. These losses represented not just machines, but irreplaceable human expertise. Each U-boat carried approximately 48 crew members, all highly trained, specialists. A submarine commander required years of training and operational experience to achieve full combat effectiveness. The loss of 6 or 7 submarines meant the loss of nearly 300 trained submariners, including experienced officers and technical specialists, who could never be replaced quickly enough. The industrial equation was equally brutal. German shipyards produced submarines at approximately 1 boat per month. Allied anti-submarine forces achieved kill rates far exceeding this replacement capacity. By mid-1944, the mathematical outcome was certain. German submarine forces would be eliminated through attrition long before they could significantly impact Allied operations. The technological gap continued widening. American radar systems could detect surfaced submarines at ranges exceeding 15 miles under optimal conditions. German submarines required surface running for battery charging and air replenishment, creating unavoidable vulnerability windows. Each time a U-boat surfaced, even briefly, it risked detection by radar-equipped aircraft or surface vessels that could close to attack range before the submarine could dive and escape. Allied sonar improvements eliminated many traditional submarine advantages. Early war, ASDIC systems lost contact during attack approaches. Later systems like the British-type 147 and American QC equipment maintained target tracking throughout engagement sequences, providing continuous targeting data for weapons systems. The combination of improved detection and forward-firing weapons like Hedgehog created conditions where submarine survival became statistically improbable. The production statistics revealed the scale of Allied industrial commitment to anti-submarine warfare. The United States manufactured over 600,000 depth charges by war's end, along with thousands of Hedgehog projectiles and associated fire control equipment. Britain produced comparable quantities. This massive investment in specialized weaponry reflected strategic recognition that submarine warfare would be decisive in both Atlantic and Pacific theaters. Training programs produced thousands of qualified sonar operators, depth charge crews, and anti-submarine specialists. American naval schools graduated new ASW personnel at rates that Axis training facilities could not match. Experience gained in Atlantic convoy operations transferred rapidly to Pacific theater units, multiplying institutional knowledge and tactical expertise. Every successful attack was analyzed, lessons learned were disseminated fleet-wide, and procedures were refined continuously. The Hedgehog's advantages over conventional weapons extended beyond the tactical level. Logistically, the weapon was simpler to handle than depth charges. Each projectile weighed 65 pounds compared to 300 pounds for a depth charge. A single sailor could carry a Hedgehog projectile. Depth charges required handling equipment or multiple crew members. Reloading time for a Hedgehog launcher was approximately 3 minutes. A trained crew could maintain sustained attacks as long as ammunition lasted. The weapon's reliability was exceptional. Unlike depth charges with hydrostatic fuses that could fail at depth, Hedgehog contact fuses were mechanically simple and highly dependable. The failure rate was minimal. When the weapon fired, crews could be confident that every projectile would detonate on contact with a solid object. This reliability contributed to the weapon's psychological impact on both attackers and defenders. Allied crews trusted it. German submariners feared it. The tactical flexibility of forward-firing weapons proved decisive in convoy defense operations. When a submarine attacked a convoy, escorts could immediately respond without breaking formation or exposing merchant ships to additional risk. The escort simply turned toward the contact and fired Hedgehogs while maintaining station on the convoy. Traditional depth charge attacks required the escort to sprint forward, pass over the submarine, drop charges, and then circle back. This maneuver took time and created gaps in convoy coverage. In the Pacific theater, where Japanese submarines often operated close to shore or in restricted waters, the Hedgehog's precision proved invaluable. Traditional depth charges in shallow water risked damage to the attacking ship from the explosion's shockwave. Hedgehog projectiles, detonating only on contact, eliminated this risk. Ships could attack submarines in waters as shallow as 100 feet without danger to themselves. The weapon also found unexpected applications. During the Normandy landings in June 1944, specialized landing craft assault boats carried Hedgehog launchers instead of troops. The projectiles were modified with impact fuse extensions to detonate above ground. These hedgerow craft cleared 100-yard-wide paths through German beach obstacles, mines, and barbed wire. The success rate was exceptional, demonstrating the weapon's versatility beyond anti-submarine warfare. Australian forces adapted the Hedgehog into a land-based bunker-busting weapon mounted on Matilda tanks. The 7-shot launcher could fire projectiles accurately at fortified positions. Although the war ended before this variant saw combat, it demonstrated how effective weapon design principles could be adapted to different operational requirements. The Soviet Union recognized the Hedgehog's effectiveness and began producing copies in 1949. The WWII was essentially identical to the British original. By 1956, Soviet engineers had developed the WWII set with increased range of 644 meters. These weapons remained in service with Soviet and Russian naval forces for decades, testimony to the fundamental soundness of the forward-firing anti-submarine concept. For German submariners operating in the war's final months, the 20-second window represented more than just a tactical problem. It symbolized the broader collapse of German naval strategy. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat force and later Führer of Germany during the final weeks of the war, had believed submarine warfare could strangle Allied shipping and force Britain out of the war. The mathematics of convoy battles in 1940 and 41 supported this belief. German submarines were sinking merchant ships faster than they could be replaced, but the industrial and technological tide turned decisively in 1943. Allied shipyards began producing merchant vessels faster than submarines could sink them. Liberty ships, mass-produced using prefabricated sections and assembly line techniques, could be completed in as little as 4 weeks. Allied merchant tonnage afloat actually increased during 1943 despite submarine attacks. Meanwhile, U-boat losses climbed to unsustainable levels. The Hedgehog contributed significantly to this reversal. While not the only factor, it represented the kind of technological innovation that transformed warfare. A relatively simple weapon, mechanically uncomplicated, based on proven spigot mortar principles, achieved revolutionary results through clever application of basic physics. Forward firing eliminated the dead zone. Contact fusing maximized explosive effect. Rapid sink rate minimized evasion time. Combined with improved sonar, these characteristics created a weapon system that submarines simply could not defeat through tactical skill alone. In the final accounting, 11 of the last 16 U-boat sinkings by United States Navy destroyers and destroyer escorts in World War II were achieved using forward-firing projectiles like Hedgehog. The success rate spoke for itself. What had once required dozens of depth charges and hours of pursuit now often needed just a single Hedgehog salvo and a few minutes. The efficiency gain was enormous, freeing escort vessels for other duties and multiplying the effective strength of anti-submarine forces. The human stories behind these statistics were both tragic and inevitable. Young men in their 20s, German, Japanese, British, American, fought a technological war where individual courage mattered less than industrial capacity and scientific innovation. A U-boat commander with years of experience could do nothing against a weapon that gave him 20 seconds to live. An escort commander with mediocre tactical skills could sink submarines efficiently if equipped with Hedgehog and trained in its proper use. This represented a broader truth about World War II. The conflict was ultimately decided not by tactical brilliance or fighting spirit, but by industrial production and technological advancement. The side that could build more ships, train more crews, develop better weapons, and field them in overwhelming numbers would win. The Hedgehog exemplified this principle. A weapon designed by engineers, produced by factories, used by properly trained crews, proved more decisive than any amount of traditional naval skill. For the German submariners who survived the war, the 20-second window became a defining memory. Veterans spoke of the terror of hearing those soft splashes, knowing death was descending through the water column toward them. Some described the paralysis of helplessness, understanding that no evasive maneuver would likely succeed. Others recalled frantic attempts to calculate depth, angle, speed, distance, trying to find some combination of factors that might move their boat outside the impact pattern. The mathematics rarely favored them. A Hedgehog salvo created 24 potential impact points spread across 140 feet. A Type 7 U-boat was 220 feet long and 20 feet wide. Even if the submarine turned 90 degrees and presented its narrowest profile, the boat still occupied significant space within the pattern, and turning took time, precious seconds that allowed the projectiles to sink deeper. By the time the turn completed, the weapons were at depth. Going deep was equally futile. Submarines at 400 feet were theoretically below the Hedgehog's maximum effective depth, but reaching 400 feet from 200 feet required time and created noise. The attacking destroyer would hear the depth change and could fire another salvo adjusted for the new depth. And at 400 feet, the submarine was approaching crush depth, where the pressure hull might fail even without battle damage. Most commanders chose to stay at moderate depth and hope the projectiles missed. The final irony was that the Hedgehog's silence when it missed actually increased psychological pressure on submarine crews. With traditional depth charges, Even misses created massive explosions, shock waves, noise. The crew knew they were under attack. They could hear the charges detonating, feel the boat shaking, smell the cork insulation shattered by shock waves. It was terrifying, but at least provided information about the attack's intensity and direction. Hedgehog attacks that missed were simply silent. The projectiles entered the water with soft splashes, then sank silently to the ocean floor, where they never detonated. The submarine crew heard nothing after the initial splashes. No explosions, no confirmation that the attack had ended. Just waiting in the darkness, wondering if another salvo was already in the water, descending toward them with lethal precision. This uncertainty was maddening. Submariners preferred the terror of depth charge attacks to the silent menace of Hedgehog. At least with depth charges they knew when the attack ended. The explosions stopped, the water settled, sonar contact broke, and they could attempt escape. With Hedgehog, they never knew if the attack was truly over or if the next salvo would be the one that found them. The weapon's effectiveness created operational changes throughout submarine forces. German doctrine shifted from aggressive convoy attacks to defensive patrols and supply runs. By late 1944, most U-boats operated not as commerce raiders, but as supply vessels carrying critical materials between isolated garrisons. This represented complete abandonment of the strategic vision that had motivated submarine construction in the first place. Japanese submarines faced similar evolution. Early in the war, Japanese boats operated aggressively, attacking warships and merchant vessels throughout the Pacific. By 1944, most surviving submarines ran supply missions to bypass island garrisons. The transformation from offensive weapons to defensive logistics reflected both the effectiveness of Allied anti-submarine warfare and the desperation of Axis strategic positions. The 20-second window became emblematic of this broader transformation. In 1940, a submarine commander detected by sonar still had excellent chances of survival through skilled evasion. By 1944, detection meant probable death. The window of survival had narrowed from minutes to seconds. This compression of tactical time reflected the acceleration of technological development during the war. Weapons that had been science fiction in 1939 were operational reality by 1943. Radar that could detect submarines on the surface. Sonar that maintained contact throughout attack approaches. Forward-firing weapons that eliminated the dead zone. Contact fuses that guaranteed kills on direct hits. Each innovation narrowed the submarine's window of survival until the window effectively closed. The legacy of the Hedgehog extended far beyond World War II. Every major navy studied the weapon's principles and incorporated similar technologies into their anti-submarine arsenals. The concept of head-thrown weapons became standard doctrine. Modern, anti-submarine missiles like ASROC and SUBROC descended directly from the Hedgehog's forward-firing principle. Even today's torpedoes owe something to the realization that contact weapons could be smaller and more effective than proximity weapons. The submarine threat never disappeared. Nuclear-powered submarines with advanced stealth characteristics pose challenges similar to those faced by World War II escorts. But the fundamental principle remains unchanged. Detection is the hardest part. Once a submarine is found, modern weapons can prosecute attacks with efficiency that would have seemed magical to 1944 destroyer crews. The Hedgehog established this principle. Given accurate detection, forward-firing weapons could kill submarines with reliable consistency. In the cold calculation of naval warfare, the Hedgehog represented optimal design, simple enough to produce in quantity, reliable enough to trust in combat, effective enough to change the tactical equation, and devastating enough to break enemy morale. These characteristics made it one of the war's most successful weapon innovations, measured not by dramatic appearance, but by practical results. The 20-second window closed permanently when the last German U-boat surrendered in May 1945, but the principle it represented, the compression of tactical time through technological innovation, continues shaping warfare. Modern combat increasingly resembles the submarine's dilemma. Once detected, survival depends less on skill than on having defensive systems that can react faster than attacking weapons can arrive. For the submarine crews who experienced the Hedgehog firsthand, the memory never faded. Post-war interviews with survivors revealed consistent themes. The helplessness of knowing you'd been detected, the terror of waiting for projectiles to arrive, the desperate hope that the pattern would miss, and the knowledge that even if this attack failed, another would follow immediately. The sustained pressure, attack after attack, while sonar maintained contact, broke even experienced crews. This psychological dimension was as important as the physical damage. Submarine warfare had always been psychological warfare. Crews operated in cramped spaces, under constant stress, knowing death might come without warning. The Hedgehog amplified these pressures by making survival mathematically improbable. The weapon transformed anti-submarine warfare from a battle of wits between commanders to a battle of probabilities, where statistics mattered more than skill. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.